Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. And man, this is honestly a pretty awkward one to talk about because it's Ubisoft. It is the massively rough situation that they have found themselves in, really through a lot of their own inaction and terrible things going on within their company. Now, there's been a recent report from Jason Schreier that really goes deep into this, and it's interesting and it's relevant for really a whole bunch of different perspectives. One of them is obviously that when bad things are happening, we should reveal them and talk about them. There is another side, which is how it impacts the video games, how it impacts the consumer, and certainly there's been a problem there, where essentially the guy at the top who could basically greenlight games or do whatever pretty much with a single word, yeah, it really seems like he was responsible for a lot of Ubisoft's games feeling the same and kind of being bad. So really, there's just a lot to get into today, and with that said, I think that's just what I'm going to do. Going to get into it. So let's kick it off. Now, for the sake of just brevity, we're not going to address every single actual allegation in detail, but suffice to say, if you're interested in that, do read Jason Schreier's his article. It does a wonderful job of basically just putting everything down. And overall, the story of Ubisoft is one of action and inaction. The victims of these different situations were active and actually submitting their complaints and speaking up, but, many of those complaints just gathered dust, with a HR department that seemingly was complicit in just not dealing with things. Now, there are some times where Ubisoft did act. As an example, they got rid of one person's boss and compensated her with, for all of her trouble, a $200 Visa gift card. Surprisingly, she no longer works at the company, and that's maybe not the type of situation that one would expect from something that serious happening. But for the most part, there was a culture of people's complaints and problems like that being ignored, mishandled, and undermined. And this is something that we really have heard from so many different people, and then Schreier's article, which really does just blow the lid on it and go into even more detail and things. Now, you might be wondering why, and why this is specifically something people are talking about with Ubi. Well, the thing with Ubisoft is it was established in 1986, and it's pretty much been, it is, a family-run business. It has been ever since. And this was often an attractive prospect for employees because, you could go there, you could sort of put in your long service and be rewarded for it, right? That kind of older school way of things being done. Now, what this ended up doing in practice, as has been revealed by all the things that went on at the company, is fostered this situation where people can go there, put in their time, rise up, and kind of become untouchable, right? A bit of an old boys club, seemingly stuff like that actually going on. And that means that the toxic stuff that happened at that workplace was pretty deeply ingrained. Think about the older stuff that happened with Riot. I don't know if you've seen, say, Richard Lewis's reporting on that, him basically saying that, yeah, stuff has happened that's been positive at Riot recently, but when the NDAs go in a few years, it's going to be mad. That was kind of like this new company, big success, whereas here it seems to be different in nature, older, deeper in how ingrained those things are. And it really is odd how it actually does all come back to impacting the games. And a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear about as we go through today's report, you're going to feel it if you've ever played Ubisoft games before, which I think is just an interesting little tidbit. Of course, not as important as addressing the terrible things that have happened there. But yeah, basically, it was a bit of an old boys club sort of thing. Look, I understand having a bit of a drinking culture, but when you're forcing on people and there's that inappropriate stuff and a lot of management-led debauchery that people feel like they have a social penalty for not partaking in, then you've got big, serious problems, right? So people either felt like they had to acquiesce to the way of doing things or just sort of work hard on the outside of all of that, which of course is something that people would really see as not the best option because it would be limiting their career prospects and their ability to actually get promoted at a company like that. Now, the CEO obviously has promised change, right? He declared on the 12th of July that Ubisoft had fallen short of its obligation to guarantee a safe, inclusive workspace for employees. But of course, the thing with that is he's been the CEO since 1988. That's a long ass time. And many employees are, of course, a bit unconvinced, right? Because he had sort of presided over all of this stuff happening. However, it has also been covered that there's employees who are surprised, even shocked at the statements being made, and in a positive way. Seemingly, there has been a lot of change. And when you go into the list of heads that have rolled, like real key people, some of them even close personal friends of the CEO, yeah, they certainly have taken actions. I think that is for sure. As an example, there have been senior creators who have got the boot or have left. There's the heads of HR and Ubisoft's Canadian studios who have also, are also no longer at the company. Now, through all of those, though, the most significant departure is Serge. And yes, I'm going to butcher every French name that I come across. Sorry. But the situation with him, right, is he's a close personal friend of Yves. He's been one of their lead creatives for a long-ass time. He was hired in 1988, and he now actually leads Ubisoft's rather infamous core creative, editorial department that's based out of Paris. Now, this is basically a curious collection of creatives that essentially decided the direction of all Ubisoft franchises. Literally everything from a high-level design perspective went through these guys. He oversaw the creation of franchises like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, and the molding of them into what they sort of ended up becoming. And he's somebody who was basically, from what we hear, treated like, one of the family. Now, he alone could cancel, greenlight, or overhaul a game to his specifications pretty much by saying a word, and he essentially had the devolved authority to just do that. Right? Now, Ubisoft would call these meetings gates, and Serge was essentially the gatekeeper to essentially Ubisoft. And honestly, he sounds like an absolute nutter. Numerous staff members have shared stories of him banging his head off the table, off his desk in meetings to convey that he was bored. Then other things like growling at people in the hallway, just growling at people. He was doing that too, allegedly. There's also numerous reports of inappropriate behavior that had been sent up to HR, but basically him being immune to complaints based on his position in the company. And basically, if you're an employee there, you either had to work with him or you had to just find a new job because you couldn't really find a way sort of around him, right? And that behavior is something that was contagious. As an example, he held a lot of business meetings at strip clubs, so the strip club buddies would be the people he'd be more likely to promote at the expense of other employees who did not want to partake in Serge's, you could say, sort of way of doing things. So basically kind of frat house mentality. And it's that sort of thing where company culture, there's a bottom-up way of it being and there's a top-down way. And really both things are really important. In this case, I think you really have a top-down situation where the culture and the expectations of employees of what they should do, who they should be, and what's okay to do at this company, it's set by guys like this. And you can obviously see where the problems will have arisen from that. Now, let's actually bring this over to the video games. I don't want to minimize, of course, the very serious things that are going on by saying, how does this impact our video? But it is a relevant thing here. So it kind of feels like a no-brainer that this environment and this one guy having so much power would have impacted their games. And, it did. So from what we understand, basically his role is impacted quite a lot. Now, there's examples like in 2014, it was said that Assassin's Creed Unity couldn't have female characters in the multiplayer because of essentially production constraints, which, you know what, if an indie had have said that, where maybe they only had one or two riggers and, they had to reanimate everything, I'd sort of get that. But from a company like Ubisoft with some projects having over 1,000 staff, a bit harder to believe, to be completely honest with you. Then the game Assassin's Creed Syndicate in 2015, supposedly the two main characters were supposed to have equal screen time, but after going through the Ubisoft marketing and then Serge situation, there's no surprise that the male character Jacob ended up essentially being the front of the franchise, or the front of the game. Then for Assassin's Creed Origins, the original plan was for Bayek to be killed and for them switching over to his wife as a main character. That is something that obviously changed. And then for Assassin's Creed Odyssey in 2018, Cassandra was actually supposed to be the main character, and her brother Alexios, that campaign has only actually appeared because of, again, Serge and marketing. And if you've played that game, the Alexios side of things is actually, I'd say, just not as interesting as the Cassandra side of things, which is not that surprising because it seems like the creatives at the studios who are making those games, the campaign they actually intended was the Cassandra one, not the Alexios one, so kind of interesting. And supposedly there's a similar thing going on with Valhalla marketing. And basically that's been off this belief that essentially women in games don't sell, especially as protagonists. Now that is quite funny considering Horizon Zero Dawn has done pretty darn well, how Tomb Raider's done pretty darn well, how even niche games like Nier Automata have done pretty darn well, sort of Bayonetta, stuff like that. So it does seem a little bit odd and really something that's very much from the marketing and Serge side of Ubisoft. Now, there are interesting stories, like people having to basically make compromises with Serge over what they could do because he had so much power. Now, this is one bit that also gets me. Serge supposedly hated linear storytelling and cutscenes. You know the things that Assassin's Creed was good at with, well, I'd say especially 2 and Brotherhood? Well, that's basically what Serge hated. So no surprise the direction that and so many Ubisoft games ended up going in. And the writers basically found that they had to have these, they basically had to include a strong male lead, kind of for the sake of it, basically because Serge would get really bored if that wasn't there, and that was just the way to keep his attention. Seems like a bit of an odd fellow. I don't know, maybe he's really insecure about something. But anyway, now the thing that is, I suppose, interesting as well is, even aside from all of these allegations of misconduct and stuff, Serge's actual influence appears to have actually been waning anyway, because his department has been responsible for things such as The Division 2 being the way that it was, and Ghost Recon Breakpoint being the way that it was, because of course Breakpoint, brought in all those RPG-like mechanics seemingly for the sake of monetization and made it feel a bit more similar to The Division. And a lot of people just thought, this is not what we want from Ghost Recon, and also, it's not really that good, it's a bit shit. Which it certainly was, and both of those games were considered flops by Ubisoft. Now, that of course led to Ubisoft delaying much of their catalogue, taking actually quite a lot of responsibility over it, promising to overhaul their core creative team, or sort of editorial department in Paris, and that stuff actually minimized Serge's power a lot. So basically, when you think of him, what you should think of is open world, collectathons, radio towers, just all that stuff that became Ubisoft generic. That's where it came from this guy. And as a part of what they ended up doing in response to all that stuff, they elevated 7 VPs to his level of seniority, which will have, of course, decreased his influence. Although 2 of those 7 VPs have actually been got for their misconduct as well. So, when we move on to the future, well, Serge's departure was announced on the 12th of July alongside with Cécile Cornet. I think Cornet? It's probably not Cornet. That would be a very Northern Irish way of saying a French name, who was the global head of HR. HR obviously had numerous failings. Also, Yanis Mallet. Yanis, anyway, he's gone. He was the managing director of Ubisoft's Canadian studios. And then also, Yves has committed to sweeping changes, and quite a bit seems to have actually been done, but there's obviously a long road ahead, and there is just that issue of credibility where a lot of staff are thinking, I get that you're saying all these things, but you guys presided over all this and a HR department that pretty much buried a bunch of it. How can we trust you to actually effect that change? So, a bit interesting. I mean, if you look at some of these things, like Yanis's, his replacement is actually a cousin of Yves's family, which, it's keeping it in the family, which sometimes is a little bit iffy. Now, look, for the players, if we're purely to take it in that way, well, there is the shake-up of the editorial team that could be positive for Ubisoft's future output, and the sheer amount of power that was wielded by Serge that obviously hindered their projects rather than help them, I think. I think a lot of us felt that in Ubisoft's output, and it seems like that will no longer be the thing. Maybe in the future, every Ubisoft game won't feel like the same damn thing, which would be good for the output of their games, I would say. Really, I think it just does depend on the quality of the people who are elevated to that team and whether they can help to diversify Ubisoft's games. I mean, certainly doesn't really look like there's many sort of fresh faces or voices coming up there, if you get what I mean, but, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We'll give them a chance, because obviously their success is our success, and I do wish Ubisoft the best, as in, I really think it would be better for the industry if these problems were solved, because there are so many people working within Ubisoft, and it would obviously be better if Ubisoft was able to reform itself such that those people would have a good work environment, and then also so that, of course, consumers would get good quality products that are actually well differentiated from each other in the future, which I think is what everyone would want. So to close this one, Ubisoft have got a hell of a lot of work in their hands, a lot of problems. I mean, attracting talent could be pretty damn hard. That said, Riot have been hiring a lot. Riot had extreme issues in the past. It seems like they're maybe working to overcome those issues, so yes, Ubisoft could do it. For the games, I think in short, overall, this all seems decently good. It does seem like the dickheads in the company were actually pretty damaging to the quality of the game, so there's that. And in some ways, yeah, Yves has done more than you would maybe maybe expect and been pretty vocal about making changes. But still, I'm like, it seems like a lot of staff are happy with what he said, but a lot of staff are also still calling for his resignation because he did preside over all of that bad stuff happening, which is obviously something. Now, he did send a video to staff saying he was truly sorry and promising a whole bunch of change. Yeah, like there's just a 10-minute video that went out promising to change Ubisoft from the better for the better, and that does include a total overhaul to the HR department. So if he actually is able to stick by his word and make all of these things actually happen, then fair enough, that would be good for the people involved. That said, for the staff who are obviously skeptical about some of this, I think we can all totally understand why there would be some skepticism there. But yeah, past that, I mean, there's new measures being introduced to enable HR to be more influential and a bit more independent, so they can just have, just be more empowered to actually go do things that they need to do. They're also working on revamping their hiring processes, and they want to hire 3 new VPs from underrepresented groups as well, and 1 vacant post will be heading up the editorial department. So we'll have to see how that goes. So there you go. Basically with Ubisoft, they're bloody massive, as we covered in our State of Ubisoft video. They've got a lot of projects on the go. They've also had these really deep problems that have impacted the lives of their staff in really terrible ways, probably held back a lot of careers as well, and then also being pretty bad for the quality of their games. Ideally, things will be better for their games and things will be better for their staff. The only way we can really know that, though, is to be vigilant and to actually see how things go on both of those fronts. So, I'd like to know what you think about this story. Do you think Ubisoft can actually reform itself? Do you think they'll be successful? Do you trust its current leadership? I'd love to know down below. And I suppose then, if there was a diversification of Ubisoft's games such that they were no longer all really long open world radio tower climbing games, what would you like to see? Where would you like to see Assassin's Creed go, or Ghost Recon go, or hey, maybe even Splinter Cell coming back? Keep on teasing us with that one, don't they? So anyway, thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. And yeah, there'll be lots more content on the channel. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.